Hello, foodie fans. Welcome to the Big Food Talk, produced by Tough Monkey Entertainment. I'm your host, Sal Conca. This show supports restaurants, chefs, and food pioneers with your help. Head to bigfoodtalk.com to make your donation today, or check out our fun apparel line with proceeds going directly to participating restaurants. Special thanks to the Long Island Food Council, DineLI Facebook group, and Yelp Long Island for supporting this episode. Today I'm speaking with pastry chef Claudia Fleming, the James Beard Award winner and former owner of the North Fork Inn here on Long Island. Claudia's had an illustrious career working at restaurants such as Tribeca Grill and Grammercy Tavern. She's now famous amongst pastry chefs and home cooks for her out-of-print cookbook, The Last Course. We talk about her passion and her struggles and what's in store for the future in this week's episode. Let's hear Claudia's story. Hello, Claudia. Welcome to the Big Food Talk. I'm so excited to speak with you today. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing these days?
I'm doing okay. I'm hanging in. It's a tough time. Man, mostly just, not just, mostly, sometimes it's more difficult to be on the outside watching all your friends and colleagues struggle.
Yes. Absolutely. I know you have a rich history in the restaurant industry. We're going to talk about some of that. I kind of want to get people that don't know you so they have an understanding of what you've done. You know, by 1999, you were already working as a pastry assistant at the Tribeca Grill. How did that transform your career in one way or another? How did working at Tribeca Grill really transform your career?
Well, I worked with a group of people who were so passionate and dedicated to not only cooking, but hospitality. And whilst, Danny Meyer rightfully gets the lion's share of that credit, there were people before him, many, but in my case, Drew Nieperant, and who owned the Tribeca Grill along with Robert De Niro, and the crew that was in the kitchen, who was just excited and passionate and obsessed with cooking for people. A friend would come into the dining room, or a colleague who happened to have the night off, and the kitchen would go into overdrive, trying to please and excite and make everyone feel, as welcome and as gratified and satisfied with what they were presented as the people preparing it for them. And it was extraordinary to watch these guys, and they were mostly guys, just do almost literally backflips to make people enjoy their experience.
And I think that's important for people as customers, right? When we think about the general consumer that goes to dine out, I don't know if they really understand what goes into the back of house and the passion that goes into the food,
Yeah.
the perfection. I mean, we see the Gordon Ramsays of the world barking orders now in reality TV shows, but I don't think they really understand. Can you give us like a sneak peek? Well, you kind of just did, but how does that inner working of the back of house work and come together to create these meals and the timing, the pacing, all the things that go into
Yes,
this?
it's a dance. It's an orchestra. It's, art. Cooking is a practice. It's a craft. I don't really consider it an art, but it is very artful in that, just as I said, the dance or the orchestration of what happens through practice and through working with the same people for an extended period of time. you get to know other people's strengths and weaknesses, and hopefully you compliment them. And I never worked in a competitive kitchen where, I mean, they were competitive in that everybody was doing their best, but people were not competing against one another. It
Mhm.
was a group effort. It is not it's a team sport.
Absolutely.
It's not an individual sport by any means. um
Absolutely. I think that's important too, is that everything has to come together with everyone playing their part.
yep. And you
Everybody
have
needs to.
to rely on people all the time. And then another beautiful thing, this was very early in my career, so these things were very impactful for me. When you saw somebody with a weakness, or somebody that wasn't quite getting to where they needed to be, the sous chefs would jump in and just, never berate them. I mean, there was tons of ribbing and cajoling, but no one ever let anybody drown.
Hmm.
They were all there to help each other rise.
And
And
that's wonderful to
it's
hear.
a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. I mean, that's a great, from what people, I think, in the media and how and entertainment now, how kitchens and restaurants are portrayed. To hear what it's really like is very comforting to understand what that looks like. And you worked at a number of, we'll call them named restaurants, from Tribeca Grill to Grammercy Tavern. Now, what was different about your experience when you moved on to Grammercy Tavern from Tribeca?
Um, it was many years later,
Hmm.
and there was my experience in France to sort of that went in between, very in right smack in the middle of those two experiences. So, um, Tribeca was very intense, but going to France was a whole new level of intense. Um, and then coming back to the States, where things had, you know, uh, um, it gotten to a different point. It was a kinder, gentler kitchen at Grammercy Tavern for sure. Um, you know, Tom was older than the guys I worked with at Tribeca, and not that he was old by any means. He was in his late 30s, 40 maybe. Um, but and with the influence of Danny, it whilst there wasn't direct yelling at Tribeca, it was very loud and
We'll call it
noisy and
robust.
robust. Thank you. Vibrant. Um, and it was much more low key at Gramercy. It was more low key.
Mhm.
Different personalities entirely. Um,
And now you were in a completely different role. You were no longer, obviously, through your experiences in France and everywhere else where you came back, you were now the head pastry chef at Gramercy, correct?
that's right. That's right. And I was in so far over my head, it was nearly drowning every day. Um,
Did you think, and this isn't, don't take the question, but did you think maybe, did you feel like you didn't have enough experience for that role at the time? Or,
Absolutely, I did not. I did not. I worked at Union Square for many years, and in the very early days, and Danny trusted me, and therefore I perhaps convinced Tom to trust me. I don't know. Um, I I started cooking much older. I was in my 30s, so when you're older, people tend to heap responsibility on you that you're not necessarily ready for, just because you're more mature. And I think that was part of why I was there.
and then you started to become more independent, after having worked there in 2001, you released this cookbook, this pastry cookbook, called The Last Course in 2001. And that has become just kind of this cult underground cookbook that took off, that pastry chefs need to get, but they can't get it. What was your inspiration?
What was my inspiration?
Yeah.
The things I was doing at Grammercy, for sure. It was my repertoire at Grammercy. I never thought of, doing a cookbook. Once again, Danny Meyer steps in, and we had a huge literary clientele, like in the publishing. We had a huge publishing business at Grammercy because of its location. It was near a lot of the publishing houses. So we had editors and agents and writers in there all the time.
Interesting.
So one of our more prominent agent guests, David Black, who is still my agent today, Danny said, "Why don't you talk to David?" I'm like, "I don't know. I don't know how to do this. I don't know, blah, 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 blah." So anyway, he pretty much convinced me that it was possible. I could do it. And along with Melissa Clark, who is now a very famous New York Times writer and author of 32 cookbooks, she and I collaborated and spawned a great friendship and a timeless cookbook.
Apparently. And so how many recipes actually went into the book itself?
There's about 150, which is kind of standard. It's not a tome, it's not encyclopedic. It really was my repertoire at the time.
Mm-hmm. And so going into it, you just basically pulled from your experiences, essentially.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
did it encompass recipes that you had done everywhere from Tribeca to France to Grammercy?
Yes,
Was it all encompassing of your career at that time?
yes, yes. Um,
Amazing.
yeah, the highlights, I'd like to say, the best of.
Understood. And so the reason this became, I think, such an underground kind of cookbook amongst pastry chefs, it went out of print, right? So it became rare and hard to find. And I think not until recently, was it 2019, you did a republish of the book. Is that true?
Yes, yes. People tend to want what they can't have, right? So the demand was ridiculous because when it went out of print, obviously people couldn't get it. So yeah, my publisher just approached me and said, "Can we republish?" I'm like, "Sure." The book came out a month after the Trade Center, the towers fell.
Sure.
And unlike now, it was a different kind of crisis, obviously. People were not at home baking. Um, and so it slipped really under the radar, and it just wasn't embraced as it is now, all these years later, which is just so interesting. And my heart hurts for all the people who had their books published this last spring and who aren't out on their book tours and, getting the recognition they need and deserve to sell their books.
That's interesting that that was the time period where your book came out, and now, and what we're dealing with now today, having this conversation, it's quite the dichotomy. It's very, very interesting times. And so after the cookbook had come out and you had been working for a number of years in the city, you decided you had got married, and
Hmm.
then you decided to move back to Long Island. You're originally a Long Islander, right? What town
I
did you
am
grow
from
up in?
Brentwood.
Grew up in Brentwood. Amazing.
Yep.
And
Bad,
so
badass Brentwood.
love it. And in 2005, you moved to Long Island to open the North Fork Inn with your husband.
Yes. Yes.
What was the inspiration for that? What not the inspiration, but why? Why did you decide to move back to Long Island?
Well, so little backstory. I met Jerry at Tribeca Grill. He was the sous chef slash pastry chef there. So he was my first pastry chef boss. Um, anyway, we lost contact after I left Tribeca Grill and then met again 10 years later at the James Beard Awards. Struck up a new friendship. One thing led to another, and then we got married.
Mm-hmm.
So we also got married in 2001. And I don't know, maybe it was the hangover from 9/11 that made us want to leave the city. It was just getting so hard. I had worked for the person who, I worked for Danny and Tom for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think it could get any better for me. Jerry was working for Charlie Palmer also for many years and didn't feel like it could get any better for him. And we wanted to do something together. And, as we all know, it's near impossible to have a business in New York City.
Any time of year, any time of
anytime. If you're not a big corporation with tons of money behind you. It was always Jerry's dream. He summered as a kid on the North Fork, and it was always his dream to come out here and have a restaurant. So we packed it up and came out here, and the rest is sort of history.
Sure. And so when you got out here to Long Island, North Fork, the restaurant aptly named the North Fork Inn, you guys were really embracing community. And we know that the North Fork has this very tight knit, still has this farm to table community using local fresh ingredients. So what was the concept behind the North Fork Inn? How did you guys envision it? How did you both create the menus? What was different about what you guys were presenting to the community?
That's funny. We never thought about what was going to be different. I remember a journalist asking me, so what's it going to be like? I'm like, we're going to have really great local seasonal food and great service. She was like, that's it? That's your hook? Mm-hmm. I'm like, we're not really looking to have a hook. Like, we're looking to do what we love to do in a beautiful place and try to make a living and, just have this hopefully more authentic, down-to-earth existence.
Mm-hmm. So it was a lifestyle for you guys. I mean,
it was totally a lifestyle.
And I think what's important there is that simple is sometimes okay, right? Simple is best in a lot of regards, because people overcomplicate dishes in many ways when you go to restaurants. And I think people look for comfort food, simple things they know, and to execute them well, to execute simple at a high level isn't that easy either.
Make no mistake, simple is very hard.
Yes.
There's nowhere to hide. Yeah. It's what you put, when you do simple, what you put on the plate has to be of the utmost quality and have been handled with care. Yeah, again, nowhere to hide.
So let's talk a bit about your food and your creation process, and not necessarily as it relates to North Fork Inn, but just overall through your career. Have you ever been called a perfectionist?
I think that's a moniker attached to a lot of pastry chefs.
Okay.
Because it's a little more, and I don't want to say fussy, more delicate, maybe more, it requires a bit more precision. I would never call myself a perfectionist.
Great. So that eliminates my next question of, wondering, does perfection get in the way of creativity? So,
not for me.
And that's a wonderful thing. I think that's why you've been able to push forward. Yeah. I mean, to be able to continue to create when some people get hindered by the creative process because they're looking for this perfect flavor palette or dish or meal, and it never comes out. It never happens.
Oftentimes that presents itself, I think, visually. Like I've been, and forgive me for going here in this time, but I'm going to be very sexist right now. And like for most men, when they conceive of a plate, they know what it looks like. And then they kind of make the food for that presentation. And again, really generalizing, really sexist. Women are more inclined to think about what they want it to taste like and how they want you to feel when you eat it, as opposed to what it's going to look like. Like, I never knew what things were going to look like until it was time for the plate to go out the door, much to the frustration of my staff sometimes, because it was like, well, what do we need? What's it going to look like? I'm like, I don't know. Just have everything there and I'll put it on the plate and we'll just see where it goes.
That's really interesting, because what I was curious about was, have you ever had any happy accidents, right? Where something just came together that wasn't pre-planned and sounds like a lot of your dishes may have happened that way.
A lot of my dishes happen that way. I tend to get in trouble when I pre-plan.
Interesting.
Because you have this preconceived idea of what it's supposed to be, and then you kind of feel like a failure if it doesn't fit into that.
Yeah, so unrealistic expectation of what the outcome should be and things of that nature.
Yeah. And a lot of undue pressure, I think, because in the end, we're just trying to make people happy and feel good. I mean, it's not brain surgery, right? It's just, yeah.
And so through your career, through the cookbook and all these dishes that you've created and made and people have tasted, is there a particular dish that you hold really dear to your heart? Is there something that when you still make it today just makes you think of a time past? Like, what's your real connection food wise, and what really makes you happy to sit down and eat or make?
I probably have to say the coconut tapioca, which just became this crazy successful dessert in my repertoire that people just go nuts over. But particularly, I think, because cooks love it so much and chefs love it so much, it makes it all the more special.
Can you explain that dish to us? What is the coconut tapioca? What goes into that?
Yeah, it's not a cake, it's not a tart, it's not a cookie, it's this tapioca pearls, which are a starch. So if you're very unfamiliar, think rice pudding, kind of, but they're these perfectly round little balls. And so they look like all these pretty little spheres floating in a coconut milk reduction. So very soupy. It has passion fruit caramel, basil syrup, a sweet basil syrup, passion fruit sorbet, coconut sorbet, and a coconut crispy wafer. So it eats creamy and cold and crispy and smooth and icy and tart and sweet. So it has a lot of different things going on, which is something that I really, really focused on early in my career, as many contrasting elements as I could put together without confusing your palate with too many different flavors. Like, I explored more temperature and texture than I did lots of different flavors together, to sort of get the essence of those flavors in a lot of different ways. And it sounds very crazy, but
No, it sounds wonderful. I mean, listen, I cook. I cook at home, and I'm very familiar. It sounds wonderful. I wish I had the opportunity to taste that dessert at some point. What's interesting, though, as you were talking through it, so I'm personally very familiar with tapioca pudding. I've made versions of it at home. I had a Brazilian roommate who taught me about tapioca. So this is going back quite a few years ago, and so she taught me all about tapioca and pudding. And so it was just the cinnamon tapioca pudding. It was very simple, very luxurious. Yes. It's very luxurious. It feels very good in your mouth, and it's just
feels delicious. Great, right? Yeah.
It's delicious. It's delicious.
Yeah. So all those different flavors were inspired by a trip to Thailand. And so, the passion fruit and the it's not Thai basil, but still basil. They pair basil and coconut and basil with a ton of things. And so, yeah, yeah.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. So as we kind of start to wrap things up a little bit, I'm curious, what advice would you give to your younger self? If you had to go back and talk to your 25-year-old self, what would you tell her today?
Oh, go a little easier on yourself, maybe. I mean, although at the same time, if I had gone easier on myself, I probably wouldn't be where I am. But I don't know. That's a really hard question. I like to encourage younger people today to kind of read more, and don't just look at pictures. Understand what you're baking. Maybe I would have liked to have told my 25-year-old self to start earlier. Unfortunately, I didn't. I couldn't. I had other interests at that point, and enjoy the learning process more instead of being intimidated by it, perhaps.
Absolutely. And there's never a lack of things to learn at any age. I mean, even as we get older and still, I'm still learning. I'm sure you are still learning
Oh
and
my
looking.
gosh, yes. I'm working on a second book right now, and it's I'm not in a restaurant. I don't have a restaurant anymore. So I'm working in my home kitchen, which is, I have to tell you, I feel for everybody who has to cook at home. It's just so hard.
Mhm.
Lots of
Yes.
dirty dishes.
Yeah, you got to clean up a lot. You don't have the industrial washers and you don't have anybody to help you and there's no sous chef.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yes, I
Yeah,
get it. So is that what the future holds for you? You're looking at a second cookbook. Is it an iteration of your last one, or is it a
I think so.
completely separate project?
Separate, separate, a lot more savory stuff, much more comfort stuff as opposed to kind of restaurant desserts. Simpler still. I'm going simpler still.
Wonderful.
And especially in this time where people are really just looking for some kind of comfort.
And I know, like you mentioned, you do not have a restaurant anymore. How are you feeling about, I'm sure you still have tons of friends in the industry, all the people you
Yeah,
mentioned in this podcast already.
yeah.
How are they doing? How are you feeling about your friends and colleagues right now during this time?
I feel helpless. I wish there was something I could do. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's harder to watch than to just be in there gutting it out. Sometimes it's easier to just get to work and scrub the floors instead of contemplating scrubbing the floors. Yeah, my heart breaks for them. And but I, knowing the amazing, resilient, hardworking people that they are, something different and great will come of it, I'm sure. No idea what that is, but I wish everyone all the very best.
I think so too. And all the conversations that I've had on this show, the chefs and the people, the owners, the ones that are, they already exuberate, have a ton of creativity and
Yes.
positivity, and they're pushing forward and they're collaborating, they're doing things different. And
Yep.
so understanding how to pivot, understanding how to be creative. And, I don't understand how to be creative. I mean, that's a complete misnomer. You are either creative or you are not, I feel like, but it's the people that really have an eye on their business. And you can see they're creative restaurants that always were. They've always been forward thinking. They're always pushing for new and learning, right? Not being
Yep.
afraid to learn and adapt. I think that's what's going to
Right.
help most people.
And not being afraid to make a mistake, because gosh knows it's not going to come out perfect the first time.
Absolutely. So Claudia, is there anywhere that people can connect with you? Is there some place they can follow
Yeah.
you or find the old cookbook still? Where can we tell people to go check you
I'm
out?
at Chef Claudia Fleming on Instagram, um, and the same on Facebook.
Okay. Beautiful, Claudia. Thank you so much for your time today. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
All the best to you. Thanks
Yep.
for asking me to be on the show.
We'll talk soon.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Big Food Talk, produced by Tough Monkey Entertainment. Subscribe on iTunes and wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Instagram for behind-the-scenes takes, or watch complete episodes on YouTube. Don't forget to make a donation at bigfoodtalk.com.